Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Neo. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. A mute woman walks into a Australian bar and orders a drink. Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. If only it was. Honestly, this place was just the sort of dive any sane person would go out of their way to avoid. It stank of loss and cheap whiskey. The scenery proved itself about as middling as the smell. Hideous brown walls were plastered with an odd green material, and who knew what else, while the wooden floor itself proved suspiciously damp. A cheap ceiling fan creaked ominously overhead, looking as if it might come crashing down at any given moment. One could only hope. Only the reckless came here. Or the desperate. Unfortunately, she embodied both. Beady eyes turned her way as she sauntered inside. Mismatching orbs stared back until they yielded. Silence achieved, Neapolitan made her way to the bar proper and plonked herself down atop one of the less rickety stools. Her fist thumped down twice to catch the barkeep's attention, one who soon proved to be a fat fop of a man with a stench to mock. He looked to have seen better days, as his bulging gut and receding hairline would no doubt attest. His clothes weren't much better, also brown and worn beneath a battered green apron emblazoned with some slogan she couldn't be bothered to remember. He looked up when she made a noise, only to realize that he had to look down just to meet her eyes. "Ain't you a little young to be drinking?" A tiny fist thundered down against the wooden counter, producing an ominous crack. Aura sparked and the man jumped. All right, what'll it be?" Neo flicked two fingers and made a swirling motion with her thumb. Eventually, the man nodded in understanding. Water. She wouldn't drink anything else in a dump like this. After a moment's pause, the girl fished a worn scroll from her pocket. Her fingers danced over and she held it up for him to see. 2 words awaited him upon that luminescent screen. He read them aloud. Cinderfall. The barkeep squinted at the message. Might have seen her. Might not. She's a wanted woman in these parts. Neo rolled her eyes and grit her teeth. Wanted fall would be a lot less than wanted when she was through with her. She'd be dead still. The man proved recalcitrant. Money spoke louder than words these days. Leon flitted across the counter. The greasy man snatched at them and shoved the coins into his stained apron. "Pleasure doing business with ya." He grinned, revealing missing teeth. "Anything else you want to know?" Neo sneered him into silence until he took the hint. 3 tables down. A thumb jerked over his shoulder. "Blonde bastard. He was asking for her. Hasn't left yet. He might know something." Hope sparked to life in her. At last a lead. Neapolitan slipped off the bar stool, her grin just the wrong shade of vicious. She cut a shallow bow and skipped away to her destiny. Some of her intent must have shown through in that smile, because the barkeep scowled at her retreating backside. "If it's a fight you be wantin', take it outside," he shouted. "Don't go wrecking the bar, blast you. Fight no, not a fight. Revenge, vengeance." Neo wanted it, craved it, needed it like the very air swelling in her silent lungs. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, evil for evil. She was owed a debt and she would see it paid in blood. Yes, she knew who was responsible for Roman's death and she would not rest until he was avenged. Her dum-dum had died badly, and so his killer would die slow. No slower. Her eyes narrowed to hooded slits as she searched for her quarry. Cinderfall wasn't here. She knew that dark hair and golden eyes anywhere. Everything had been fine before that brash bitch bowled her way in. Everything went sour because of her. Her now she tracked her to Mistral. One way or another, she'd put an end to this, even if it meant she had to search the city from top to bottom. Neo knew was close now. She felt it in her very bones. By contrast, it wasn't hard to find the man described to her. Her stuck out like a sore thumb, one nursing a flagon of ale that looked long dry. Clothes were strange, too. A red overcoat thrown over tattered orange and black rags that looked burnt. Curious. Had he bumbled into the fire bitch, there was a strange scroll of sorts propped up against his knee, and against it, a gnarled staff of what appeared to be black wood. Was that his weapon? She very much doubted it. Of what use could a staff possibly be? Unable to get a good look at him from this anger, the little killer crept closer. She plonked down into the seat opposite him. If he was at all aware of her attention, the stranger did little to show it. He didn't look up from his drink. She gave him a moment. Then another still. Finally, her patience slipped its leash. She thumped her fist on the table. "I hear you." He looked up at last. "Did you need something?" Neo flinched at the sight of him. This man might have been handsome once upon a time. He still was, in a rough way, if you didn't mind the scars, which she didn't. In truth, she was rather fond of scars. There were just a lot of them. Poor bastard looked like he'd gotten into a fight with a burning building and lost. Milky white eyes with the vaguest hint of sapphire regarded the world set, framed by whiskered cheeks and an unruly mane of blonde hair. An impish part of her wanted to give it a tug, but she resisted. On a whim, Neo waved a hand before his face. He didn't react and stared straight ahead. For a moment, she felt something akin to pity. Being mute was bad enough in a world so cold, but blind in a place like Remnant, that was a fat worse than death. At least she could see danger and beat it back. This poor bastard probably needed help just to walk. That wasn't life at all. That was a prison. Poor bastard. She couldn't help but dwell on his ruined eyes. "What happened to you?" A lopsided smile twitched at his lips as his neck craned towards her. Feeling sorry for me? Are we this from a mute? Neo jolted. Had he just? Anyway, introductions. The stranger clapped his hands. If it's names you're after, I go by Naruto. You're looking for Cinder Fall, right? Wouldn't be over here if you weren't. At her nod, and how was he aware of that? The whiskered warrior continued with that small, amicable smile of his. That's grand. So am I. She took something from me, you see. A tan hand touched the lids of his damaged eyes. I'm rather keen to get it back. Neo tilted her head. It's my fault, really. I let my guard down, tried to show her a better path. Heh. A hoarse chuckle escaped him, shoulders shaking at some grand cosmic joke she didn't understand. Didn't work out so well. Lesson learned. Some people don't deserve a second chance. His staff clinked down, rings rattling against wood. She took my eyes, so I'll take hers. Only seems fair. Neo tapped 2 fingers in an unspoken inquiry. I don't know where she is now, but I know where she's been. Naruto leaned back in his seat, balancing his scroll and staff against his good knee. She tried to attack Haven recently, failed, from what I heard. Heh. Here at last, his smile gained an edge. Not surprising. Cinder always was an arrogant little snit, even when we were younger. I bet good money she's licking her wounds here in the city. Neo scoffed. She already knew that. Didn't he have anything new? But I do know someone who can find Cinder. His words rekindled her interest. I certainly paid her well enough. A scarred hand dove into a worn pocket and flashed a worn-looking phone at her. I was going to give her a call and meet up after I finished my drink, but... Neo flicked a blank look at his empty mug. Naruto's smile said he'd noticed it. Why, so it is. How telepathy, echolocation, both. With but a flick of his wrist, the blonde cast the dry flagon over his shoulder toward the bar. Judging by the barkeep's grunt, he'd found his mark. Seems like you have a grudge against her yourself. He smacked his lips, drawing her attention back together. Say, I've got an idea. Why don't we work together? 2 heads are better than 1, after all. The very moment she began to doubt him, he laughed again. Don't worry about me. There it was again, that small, self-same smile. I'm not as helpless as I look. Not bloody likely. He'd be a hindrance. She made the stand. Better to just snatch up his scroll and do it herself. Naruto burned gold. Quick as a flash, a ringed staff swung out and snared Neo's ankle. The matching eyes bulged. Then it yanked her down. Caught unprepared by the sudden assault, Neo lost her balance and toppled to the floor in a tangle of arms and legs. The faint scent of rot reached her nose and she recoiled, pushing up and off the termite-ridden floor to tumble away from the follow-through. No attack came. What's wrong? Her patron pushed his chair back and climbed to his feet, grinning from ear to ear. Cat got your tongue. Now that he'd finally deigned to stand, Neo realized he wasn't quite as frail as she'd thought him to be. His arms were all corded muscle, his body sleek and fit. No helpless beggar was this. His hands reached down in an eerie, practiced movement to pull the strap of that strange scroll and draw it over his shoulders. Binding it to his back, he turned to face her and planted his staff. We don't have to be enemies, you know. He offered her his free hand with unerring accuracy. Come on, let's be friends. Friends with this buffoon? No, never. Neo dove at him in a whirl of steel. Naruto parried her first strike, ducked the second, and brought a fist crashing down on her head. Neo yelped wordlessly as she bit her tongue. Clenched knuckles barreled into her nose at speed, hurling her into a wall. She twirled and caromed off it, using the rickety frame as a springboard to fling herself at him in her dauntless anger. He wasn't there. A shimmering fist closed her ankle in mid-flight, wrenching her short-lived leap to an ignoble end. Blank eyes met hers. Neo twisted and stabbed at them, jabbing her weapon's hidden blade into his face. Too little, too late. Her body went soaring up and came crashing down as he smashed her against the floor. Up again now. Down once more. Her visage kissed the floorboards for a second time now as he whipped her back and forth like a rag doll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times now. Her aura cracked dully. For an awful moment, Neo couldn't move. She lay there, wedged against the floor, eyes spinning in her head. You're a nimble little thing. Warm lips caressed her ear. Who taught you how to fight? It was the wrong thing to say. An irritated puff of air parted Neo's lips. Anger sparked and she lashed out, plunging her weapon into his chest. Naruto's smile vanished as her blade passed through smoke and ash. Neo stumbled half a step, startled by the display. What kind of semblance was that she'd not seen? An uppercut caught her chin as her foe burst from the ground and struck her head on. Her tiny body sailed upward at speed to slam into the ceiling. She felt something pop in her back, but managed to wrench herself free and glided to the ground with the aid of her parasol. Somewhere below her, the bartender wailed. Stop blowing holes in my bar, take your spat outside. Naruto grunted and ceased glowing, looking mildly put out himself. Fair enough. He turned his back and in that moment of weakness, Neo struck, tackling him through a window. The moment her feet hit the ground she was gone, wrapping her semblance around herself like a shroud. To the naked eye she seemed to do just that, shattering against the ground, vanishing into the evening mist like some specter come to call. Rather than pursue her, Naruto only clicked his tongue in mild admonishment. Cinder took something from you too, didn't she know? The blind man cocked his head and called out into the mist after her, regarding the space he'd last seen like a sad fox. Someone. Your soul has an air of loss about it. He failed to notice the displaced air behind him. It's sad. Really? He sniffed once, unaware of his impending doom. Despair, I'd say. Who did you lose? A lover, a friend, a father, or perhaps? His fist snapped backward with lazy grace, catching her in the gut. Air rushed out of Neo's lungs as she folded around his outstretched limb. A partner. Neo looked up and for a moment, just a moment, she saw the specter of her old partner in this stranger. She beheld it in his smile. It was there in the way he leaned against his staff, placing both hands atop it just so as she'd seen so many times before. Those matted blonde tresses fell over a blind eye, emulating him just so. Neo's already fractured mind began to splinter further as she gripped onto his arm, falling apart piece by painful piece. His free hand came down. Not like this. She couldn't die here, not like this. It hurts, doesn't it? Bandaged fingers brushed her hair, stroking her scalp with surprising gentleness. She destroyed your life. And then he pushed her over the edge. I'm sorry for your loss. Whomever he was, he must have been important to you. Neo's world went red. Not pity. Anything but that. Her soul shrieked. Roman. A soundless scream tore from her throat as she yanked down the blind man's arm and dove at him, teeth bared. Their weapons collided in a hail of sparks and all the world became a whirl of death. Time ceased to have any meaning for Neo. She fought like a hellcat, raging and twisting and writhing, desperate to silence that small, sad smile. But she couldn't. For all her speed and skill, her opponent endured. He was a rock, weathering everything she had to give and more. I'm not your enemy, he shouted over the sound of whirling steel. You're not the only one with a grudge against Cinder. When they collided yet again, Neo realized that his staff had a blade embedded against it. Naruto twisted that staff against her thin blade, forcing her back one step, then two, followed by three. She kicked out at his shin to try and weaken him, to no avail. He absorbed the blow with ease and kicked out, ripping Hush from her grasp. It skittered across the street and vanished into the mist. Neo dove at him without it, near mindless in her fury. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Naruto pointed his staff at her and snarled. Enough. Golden light burst from him anew, brighter and angrier than ever. The sheer pressure of it forced Neo's head down and flung her into a wall. A sudden presence rippled through the air, bringing with it the howl of a mighty beast. Neo looked up and sorely wished she hadn't. Naruto was gone. In his place loomed a massive golden vulpine, bearing 9 towering tails. Big. Too big. Her mind couldn't even begin to comprehend the sheer size of such a creature. What was this, some kind of golden grim? Was that a thing massive? Monstrous. Other words starting with M, and it was looking at her now, and oh God's eye, don't 180. That great gilded beast leaned down, bringing her face to face with a glowing iris. We both want Cinder dead. So quit wasting your time fighting me. He cleared his throat, and let's discuss how we kill her together. She stumbled back with a tentative nod, eyes wide and mouth agape. Why did this braggart even need her help in the first place? If he could transform into such a creature, Cinder wouldn't stand a chance. Was there a limit, some hidden clause she wasn't aware of? Did his blindness prevent him from fighting at fully capacity? She didn't know. If knowing was half the battle, then she'd already lost this one. To her relief, the beast grinned, exposing row upon row of vicious teeth. Okay then, let's talk. Just like that, the burning light about Naruto began to dim. When it faded completely, he was a man once more. Sorry, Kurama. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, speaking to himself. That really takes a lot out of me these days. What, no? His nose wrinkled. We can't eat her. What was it, Kurama? Ah, but he was looking at her again. Neo wasn't sure she'd ever be able to look at him the same way again. Her mind gibbered anew. What kind of power was that? It couldn't be a semblance. He didn't even have aura. What few hits he'd taken had just gone right through. This wasn't a huntsman. This wasn't a grim. Fish didn't know what it was. The thought excited and terrified her in equal measure. Well, what do you say? Naruto offered her his palm. Partners, we both want the same thing, after all. Neo regarded his outstretched palm like a poisonous asp. Partners, did she dare? Her last partner died. Roman was gone. She couldn't handle the death of someone like him. Still, if this one was even half of what Roman was, and he looked to be much more than that, he should pull his weight. He'd be a useful distraction if nothing else. Come on, shake my hand. His grin grew. Won't you shake a poor sinner's hand? Screw it. If she was going to commit to this suicidal endeavor, she could do with an ally. At least then she'd make certain the bitch burned. 2 against 1 was better odds for her anyway. And so Neo reached out to grasp his hand. Strong fingers clamped down on hers. For a moment, she thought she felt a spark shoot through her palm. Probably her imagination. Yes, Naruto all but drawled the word, grinning down at her. That's the spirit. Don't suppose you've got a name. You haven't said a word. She tapped a finger to the side of her mouth with a frown. His ears twitched at the sound. Naruto offered a sheepish laugh. It was a surprisingly boyish smile. Right, forgot about that. So what do I call you? Neo stepped in and languidly traced her right hand against his exposed forearm for good measure. Naruto's brow furrowed in realization, focusing on the imaginary letters she'd scrawled there. And if her hand lingered just a little longer than it should have, well. Her new ally didn't say anything. He merely quirked a brow. His hand came down again, ruffling her hair. She jerked away with a scowl, but couldn't escape his laughter. Her heart fluttered a little. She stamped it into silence. Neo, her new ally, chortled softly. I think we're going to be the best of friends. Come on, let's go meet that broker I told you about. Neapolitan skipped after him, a small smile plucking at her the corner of her mouth. Friends, was it all right? She rather liked that assessment. It felt like an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders, as if she had been spared a terrible fate. She could make this work. No, it would work. She wore it. Cinder's days were numbered. As of this moment, Fall was living on borrowed time. She just didn't realize it yet. They would hunt her down, they would find her, and they would end her. So she swore. Revenge was a dish best served cold, after all. And theirs would prove cold indeed. The coldest of all. A mute woman and a blind man walked into another seedy, downtown bar. Honestly, Neo was just waiting for the punchline at this point. Well, if it isn't my favorite blind bastard. That wasn't it. Naruto crooked a small smile as someone slammed into his chest and embraced him, all but pinning both arms at his sides in their haste to get at him. They didn't so much hug as they did hoist him, physically lifting him into the air. Neo tensed and reached for her blade, half expecting the blonde to fly into a whirl of motion, fight his way free something anything. He didn't. Instead, he merely chortled once. I'm the only blind bastard you know, Malachite. Semantics. She set him down and stepped back with a smile. You look good for a dead man. His smile gained an edge. I got better. So you did. Their host laughed. Come and sit, I'll break out the good glasses. In short order the three of them were sat, bottles of precious wine and crystal decanters arranged before them. Naruto drank without hesitation, Neo sipped sullenly, impatient to get on with things. Drinks were all well and good to celebrate, but they hadn't done anything yet. She needed to be at her peak to face Cinder. Nothing less would do. Still, little Miss Malachite was not what Neo had expected. She was short, for one. Clearly size didn't matter if she was able to lift someone like Naruto. Clad in white and violet garb with a spider tattoo etched into her left arm and a smile to match, she certainly didn't lack for personality. This woman, queen of her domain to be sure, she held power of a different sort. She couldn't hold a candle to them in combat, but she could learn things they couldn't. Knowledge was power, and the Spider of Mistral had amassed a great deal of that indeed. She soon found herself appraised by the woman in turn. And who might you be? Neo huffed and crossed both arms before her bosom. Sassy little thing, aren't you? There was a cheery drawl to her words that bellowed her good humor. He always did like to take on charity cases. She stiffened, but before she could remark on that the woman looked back to Naruto. You know, the twins miss their uncle. You don't call, you don't write, what's a gal supposed to think? Naruto looked away. For the first time since they'd met, he actually seemed sheepish. Sorry about that. He scratched a whiskered cheek. I've been busy. She frowned. Family makes time for family, Naruto. And I will. Neo's head snapped towards the unlikely duo. Them family, how they didn't look a thing alike. As if reading her very mind, Naruto gave a rusty laugh. We're not related. Malachite's something of a friend. Friend, he says. The information broker slapped his arm with her fan. I took him in ages ago when he first landed here. I was taller back then and didn't look like this. She gestured at her thickened figure. Neo quirked a brow. Malachite saw it. Don't give me that look, you little tart. A finger prodded her nose. You try having twins and keeping your figure afterwards. No mean feat, I tell you. Moving on, Naruto slid between the two of them before they could come to blows. Do you have the information I asked after Cinder Fall? You're sure she's here? A shadow passed over the spider's face. If I'd know this was about the bitch that took your eyes, I would have done this pro bono. Neo's frown redoubled. Naruto always was a bit of a softy. The rather rotund woman confided in her. I warned him, you know. Said it would catch up with him someday. She hissed softly. Have him to tell you about his eyes sometime. If he'd just let that girl die. I am right here. Naruto tapped the table with a calloused hand. Blind, not deaf, remember, and for the record, I'm still paying you. When Malachite tried to argue, he forestalled her with a raised hand. I know times have been hard around here in Vale. When she didn't challenge him, his grin grew. You've been sending every bit of lien you can scrounge to your daughters. Those milky white eyes creased in a smile. Give Melanie and Milsha my regards. Tell them I haven't forgotten their birthday. You're not going to budge on this, are you? Nope. He smacked his lips with an audible pop. Not gonna happen. All right. Cinder Fall. A worn photograph slid across Malachite's desk. You're in luck. She hired me only yesterday. Aha, at last, a lead. Neo leaned forward and patted Naruto's face to gain his attention. Unseeing eyes turned towards her, perhaps sensing the unspoken question lurking in the depths of her mind. Creepy. She shivered a little bit, and not for the first time, wondered could he see her. He was blind. Sorry. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a worn smile. Didn't mean to scare you. If it helps, you can think of it as a blend of telepathy and echolocation. Those unseeing eyes swiveled back to Miss Malachite. What does she want? He asked the burning question for her. She's after a bunch of damn brats who whipped her sorry arse. Miss Malachite flicked her fingers and one of her minions placed another series of pictures upon the table. She paid good lien for me to ferret out their next port of call. Matter of fact, we were supposed to meet later this evening, but now she tittered softly. I'll give her a false trail. Probably best if Miss Fall gets lost in vacuo, assuming you're not here to kill her. Naruto and Neo exchanged a glance. He spoke for her. We are. Lovely. The blonde steeped her fingers. I can give you a few hours to freshen up and prepare. Use the old attic room. I'm sure you remember it. Naruto nodded. I do. It'll be nice to get rid of all this dirt. Neo burst to her feet, eyes ablaze. Finally, vengeance. Before you go, a warning. Malachite raised her voice before she could scamper off. Fall didn't come here alone. There was someone with her. Her expression darkened, reliving a poignant memory. Real mean-looking bastard. Barely said 2 words and kept his hood up the entire time. My boys couldn't get a good look at him. Not sure if there was anyone else. They might have waited outside. Just, she swallowed once, stifling a surge of emotion. Be careful. You know how vicious that bitch is. Naruto sketched a bow. Thank you. Neo mimed the action, unable to contain herself. So close. She was so very close now. She couldn't wait to see the life leave Cinder's eyes. She would die feeling the same helplessness Roman had. Kill for kill. Eye for eye. Blood for blood. Time to die. Her fingers twitched restlessly at her side, aching for action. Naruto sensed it and laid a hand on her shoulder. It's nothing. Family looks after family. Tell you what, Malachite's grin was just the wrong shade of vicious. I'll lend you a few of my boys. Let's give this bitch a good old-fashioned Malachite welcome. By contrast, Neo's smile was downright beatific. Yes, she thought. Let's do that. Roman would be avenged. You're pacing. Neo cast a restless glance over her shoulder and stuck out her tongue. Only then did she remember who she was talking to. Maybe he wouldn't notice a small gesture like that. In the dim light of their temporary quarters, she could only just see his silhouette, little more than an indistinct shape in the gloom. Grinning, she flashed him a one-fingered salute. I saw that, too. Cheeky prick he was. The little hellion folded both arms beneath her bosom, stomped to heel and resisted the urge to sulk. Blast him, that ability was bullshit. Within the rafters of the attic, two killers waited for their prey. Well, she waited. Naruto had taken a shower at Malachite's behest, changed clothes, fallen into a cot and slept like a baby. That had been what? 4 hours ago. 5. She was losing track of time up here. And still no sign of Cinder fall. Where was she? Malachite had mentioned waiting a few hours, but by the brothers this felt like an eternity. How much longer she'd forsaken sleep altogether, not wanting to miss a moment of her sweet, sweet revenge. Mistakes were made. Now her nerves were beginning to fray. Perhaps sensing her distress, Naruto sat up in his cot. Quick as you please, he snapped his fingers, conjuring an ember of flame. He set it to a candle, casting flickering shadows about the room. You're gonna run yourself ragged like that, partner. He shook his head, caught the cushion she flung at him, and clutched it to his chest. You've barely eaten anything since we got here. You're feeling all right. Neo scowled at him. She would feel better when Fall was dead. I hear that, he agreed with her thoughts, but what happens after she dies? Her world lurched. No, don't think about after. There would be time enough for that later. Neo tried not to. She really did. But her mind got away from her. Had Cinder acted alone? She wasn't sure. Didn't she have those two pawns with her? Were they complicit? Did Cinder answer to a higher power? Were they responsible for the disaster that had befallen her dum-dum? If so? No, she shook her head, tossing her hair from side to side. Cinder first. She would keep killing until he was avenged. Would you like your voice back, Neo? The assassin nearly missed a step in her pacing and crashed into a wooden beam. Naruto heard it and chortled softly. Ironic, isn't it? He laughed, leaning back against a wall. The man who can heal others can't heal himself when it matters most. But my offer stands. I can heal you. He showed her his marked hand. Give you your voice back. You can have a normal life after this, if that's what you want. You'll be able to leave all this behind her. Neo touched a hand to her throat. She'd never dreamed of such a thing. Did she dare? Paranoia reared an ugly head once more, causing her to cast another glance at her erstwhile ally. Limned in the flickering candlelight, Naruto looked worn. Not old or particularly tired, just weary. His was not the face of a man who'd given up hope, nor the expression of a good soldier following orders, not at all. His was the visage of someone who'd resolved themselves to do something ghastly for the sake of the greater good. Neo felt no such compunctions. Cinder had taken her dum-dum, and for that she needed to die. Simple as that. A tiny yawn stole out of her and she growled, shaking her head against it. No, nay, never sleep was for the weak. She needed no such thing. She could sleep when she was dead. She no nodding off when the hand came down on her shoulder. She wanted to fight it. Fight him. Her eyelids drooped. She was just so bloody tired. Get some rest. I'll wake you if anything happens. Naruto guided her head into his lap, letting her rest on his knee. She only closed her eyes for a moment, she swore. An instant, a second, a sliver of time. Nothing more. When she opened them again, the candle had burned down to harmless wax. Someone was shaking her awake. Naruto, wake up, he whispered. I hear footsteps. The smatching eyes widened. Was it finally time? Her vengeance nigh? The door burst open, revealing one of Malachite's men. Boss sent me to get you. She's here. Scarlet eyes opened in the dark. The beast yawned. Finally, Cinder approached the bar. Neo knew her at a glance from the rafters. She'd never forget or forgive that insufferable visage. Even disguised as she was, it was impossible for Fall to truly conceal the face lurking beneath that cowl. A lone golden eye glanced warily about, framed by a ratty and disheveled mop of dark hair. Neo preened at the sight. Oh my, someone was jumping at shadows. She'd bandaged one of her arms, too. Curious, were her wounds from Beacon truly hampering her that much? Could she kill Fall, weakened as she was now? She shifted forward, ready to pounce upon her. Naruto caught her by the shoulder and steered her gaze away. Do you know who that is? Begrudgingly, Neo turned her eyes upon notice Cinder's companion, what little she could see of them beneath that thick black cloak. Blast it, Malachite was right. She hadn't come alone after all. Who was that? It looked like a man, but she couldn't be sure. Was that a weapon hidden in his cloak? Another mystery. She shook her head. Thought not. He muttered. Doesn't matter, I guess. He stands with her, he dies. Below them, Miss Malachite played her part well. Words were exchanged. Leon slid across the table. Negotiations were dragged out. She listened intently as the spider spun a fanciful web about Team RWBY and their allies' destination, claiming it was none other than Vacuo. Cinder lapped it up like a starving dog, never once suspecting that she might be led astray. The hook was baited and she swallowed it whole. And then Malachite gave the signal, spoke the phrase they'd agreed upon. Maybe put away the good glasses. Cinder frowned. What are you? Those were the words. Guns came up with an audible clack. Naruto leaped down behind Cinder. Neo opened her parasol and did the same, gliding to a halt at his side. Hello, Cinder the blonde sang happily, capturing their attention. Long time no see. How's life treating ya? You. It was a funny thing to see one so powerful so afraid. The woman's back stiffened as she gasped, as she pivoted on one heel to reveal her scarred face. As such, Neo saw the precise moment the change came over her. All that anger and arrogance bled away, replaced by fear. Her hooded companion tutted softly, put out by the sight before him. Neo grinned right back, eyes alight. Not so Cinder, she went ash-white. Neo, you won't even say my name. Naruto drawled the last word. I'm hurt. I thought we were friends. Say hello, Neo. She rolled her eyes at the theatrics, but complied as he barreled on. Who's your friend? His gaze shifted to the man beside her. Not going to introduce him? How rude. The cowled man glanced back at his companion. This wasn't part of our agreement, Fall. She glowered at him. I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. The man grumbled something under his breath. Blasted deal's getting worse all the time. Naruto drew his staff in a languid movement. Step aside, pal. We're not after you. Neo hoped he would, if only to make things easier for them. She rather liked her odds 2 against 1. Alas, it was not to be. Fate was seldom that kind. She knew it when she saw the man's jaw tighten beneath his hood. His visible arm clenched into an angry fist, causing his glove to creak ominously. That, I cannot do, he growled. She's promised to help me find someone, you see. Until then, I need her. The cowl swept back, revealing red hair and horns, framed by a hideously scarred face. A crimson blade ripped free from its scabbard with a raspy hiss. Then it swept at Neo. Naruto caught it with his staff, parrying what would have been a vicious decapitating stroke. Hey, now the blonde snarled over crossed weapons. Would you look at that? Monsters really do work well together. Adam Taurus growled. You do not want this fight, fool. Naruto's grin grew. Oh, I'm pretty sure I do. His fist snapped forward, sending the faunus crashing through a wall. Neo drew her blade and lunged. She had eyes for Cinder and Cinder alone. Nothing else mattered. All hell broke loose. A wise man once said only the blind can truly see. Naruto wondered about that sometimes. Perhaps that man was right. For a man who lived so long in light, being cast down into darkness had proven something of experience. Not a pleasant one at that. Strange as it might sound, he'd grown used to having eyes, to seeing then acting on what he saw. Likewise, he'd worn his heart on his sleeve until someone scorched it away. Living without them these last few years had been painful, agonizing, horrific at times, but he had adapted. He had overcome, as he did all things, and now he thrived. All around him the world was alive with the sound of steel striking steel, the cries of battle and chaos with all it wrought. He couldn't see any of it. Not really. He saw the shockwaves of their clash, felt each reverberation as steel struck steel. Fire flashed through the air. Illusions formed and shattered like broken glass. Neo was good. Neo was very good. Cinder was better. Now wasn't the time to play about, so he sighed as he drew his staff, batting a blade aside Adam's blade more. Holding it parallel to his body, he tapped it once against the street. The sound echoed, spreading across the street in a low ripple of noise. A grainy outline interposed itself over the bleak darkness of his vision. Across the street, he heard Adam mirror the motion with his blade, listened as Wilt cleared its scabbard with an audible rasp. His senses stretched out toward the faunus, detecting negative intent and so much more. I have no quarrel with you. Though he could see him not, he knew the young man was watching him. Nor I, you. The redhead scowled. But you are in my way, thus I will kill you quickly. There is no glory in torturing a cripple. Then step aside. We don't have to fight. He had no interest in fighting someone who wasn't Cinder. Run away and live to fight another day. I'm afraid that isn't possible. Adam moved to block his path. That woman swore to help me find Blake. With her aid, I can set things right. Without her, realization dawned and a tired smile creased his whiskered cheeks. The things we do for those we love. Truer words, sword met staff, have never been spoken. Wilt whistled in from the side, though he could not see it with his scarred eyes. Naruto found himself intimately aware of its passing all the same. He was aware of everything. He tasted the telltale burn of dust on the air. He smelled the faint hint of sweat and blood on that rusted blade. He heard it move through the air toward his throat, felt all the ripples of the world move with it as a great wave, sweeping all before it. Moreover, he already had some measure of the mind behind it, just as he knew the precise angle and moment with which he would strike. And a small smile plucked at the corner of his scarred face. Gotcha. In a single seamless movement he stepped into the swing, turning what would have been a decapitating stroke into a harmless slap against the street. Its keen edge bit deep, slicing down into the street. Another ripple of sound, another grainy image. Naruto stomped down, trapped Adam's weapon in the crevasse he'd created. The faunus didn't falter. Blush snapped up and barked into his chest. Buckshot sprayed through empty air as the bullet struck a shadow clone, spraying smoke into the street. Adam whirled. What? A hand closed around his shoulder and spun him around. Naruto's reared back, smashing his forehead against Adam's nose. An awful crack filled the misty streets. Blood flew through the air. Adam crashed backward, spitting blood. "What are you?" Naruto twirled his staff and brought it crashing down. Blind eyes shimmered with a hint of gold. He took no pleasure in this. Really, he didn't. He simply didn't have time. Just a man. "I'm sorry, Adam." He tilted his head, evading wilt by the narrowest margin, uncaring as the shockwave opened a thin cut against his cheek. "But you have to die now." "Never, I won't fall here." With a roar, the younger man kicked out at his chest and whirled away, bringing his blade to bear. Naruto let it pierce his shoulder, uncaring of the grisly wound it left behind. He pushed himself forward, goring his arm on the blade, bending it to hook against his wound. Then he reached around, grabbed Adam by the face, and levered him into a wall. Ora crackled sullenly. Teeth sprayed through the air. Adam kicked out frantically, trying to escape. There would be none. Naruto slammed him into the mortar again. Once, twice, thrice. A pain cry reached his ears. Mercy. He nearly slowed. Mercy. Such a quaint word. The last time he'd shown mercy, it blew up in his face. That day he'd offered his hand in friendship, and someone spat in his face. How foolish he'd been. He'd made a choice that day. Lose his eyes to save an innocent. A fair trade, some might say. He disagreed. Kill for kill. Eye for eye. Blood for blood. An angry knot tightened in his gut. There is no mercy. With a final slam, he ruptured the boy's eardrums and cracked his skull. Scowling, he stepped over Adam's still quivering form and stormed toward Neo's dance with destiny. One down. Emerald frowned and looked up at the skies of the gremlins. A sudden shiver stole over her. Cinder. She was fine. Surely, Cinder was invincible. Shesh couldn't die, right? Vengeance was at hand. Neo had waited for this moment, longed for it, even prayed in her darker moments. The instant when her blade pierced Cinder's black heart and ended her life. She would stand over her body and watch the light leave her eye, witness the very moment of her death and savor it. She was close now, so close she could taste it. Death wouldn't be quick. It would be slow, agonizing. And so she fought to see that dream realized. All the world was a blur of steel and fire around her as she and Cinder raged back and forth, whirling, snarling, twisting against one another like a pair of shedevils. Blades clashed. Blood spattered the streets. Every speck of skill sang as semblances stretched to their limit. There was no room for thought, only action, only blood. One would stand. One would fall, just as it was meant to be. She would be denied no longer. Not one single second. Another illusion shattered to glass and crossed with blades with her, leaving one of Cinder's many swords to pass harmlessly over her head. Nice trick. Her tormentor sneered, braving her blade with both hands to push down against her. You've gotten stronger. Fire flared in her visible eye. But so have I. There was neither word nor warning for what came next. After all, how could she have prepared herself to fight a maiden instead, she foolishly pushing forward? Mistakes were made. Sparks shot down the length of their interlocked weapons, an arcing current grounding itself in Neo's body. Then there was pain. Every cell clamped down as one. Her lips parted in a soundless scream, mismatching eyes glowing blue as her body fried. Cinder capitalized on it and lashed out with a pillar of flame, flinging her away. Her body crashed backward into a wall. Clothes scorched. Or crackling, Neo jerked back, twitching, skin seared. Agony flared in her shoulder, but she ignored it. Pushed past the pain. Not yet. She couldn't stop yet. This was her moment. If she retreated now, her prey would slip away in Mistral, never to be found again. No, her mind railed at the thought. No, no, no. Up she snarled the word at her body, willing it to obey. Stand up. Why go so far? Cinder regarded her curiously as she stumbled upright. You must realize you have no chance of winning. Neo touched a hand to Roman's hat, still snug against her head. It evoked a reaction from her quarry, just not the one she wanted. I don't have time for your misplaced blame, girl. Cinder's visible eye rolled in mild disdain. I didn't kill your boss. If you want revenge, take it up with Little Red. Misplaced blame, you dare? An angry ember ignited in Neo's heart. Treacherous witch. Little Red hadn't been the one to start this now. Had she'd been there at the end to be sure, but she'd not instigated this. She understood that now. Time had given her perspective. Ruby Rose was a meddler to be sure, but she wasn't the catalyst to all this. Cinder was. Cinder had come to them first. Cinder had chosen them, ruined them, forced them onto a path of no return. And right now, for all her preening and prattling, Cinder Fall seemed weaker than she'd ever been before. Bleeding from myriad cuts, gasping for air in the mist, she didn't look a thing like that fire witch that first brought them long. Even now Neo could feel Roman's hand on her shoulder, urging her forward. This was what he would have wanted, wasn't it? Payback. Kill for kill. Eye for eye. Blood for blood. Time to die. Neo dove at her and they fell once more into a whirl of blades. Cinder met her with a snarl. You're not the only one with a grudge against Ruby. I don't care about her. Had she a voice, Neo would have screamed. This is your fault. Instead, she settled for a silent scowl as her blade slipped cut across the bandages of Fall's left arm, tearing through the sleeve. All of it. Cinder recoiled and like a madwoman, she gave chase. Every bit of it. It wasn't fair. The glass blade shattered against her parasol, but hush held. Why did it have to be us? Why couldn't you just leave us alone? Why? Cinder cut low and Neo swung high, driving a high heel into the taller woman's solar plexus. Fall folded like a wet paper bag. In a fit of pique, the mute dropped her blade and grabbed her by the head. Her knee came up again, ramming against Cinder's skull. Fall lashed out and flung her away, but the damage was done. For the first time since she'd met her, Neo saw fear lurking in that lone golden orb. It was there plain as day, written all over her scarred, wretched face. No, not good enough. She slammed forward again in a whirl of pale light. I had one thing. Another cut across her face. One person. Two now. And you took that away from me. Three. Now I'm going to take something from you, your life. Neo, a familiar voice barked. Down. It sounded so much like Roman that she obeyed without thinking, flinging herself flat to the ground. It saved her life. Flames shot over her head, immolating a nearby wall to sullen embers. That could have been her. Too close. Listen to me. Damn it, I'm not your enemy, Rubius. Her words warped into a pain cry as a blade pierced her thigh. I don't know anyone by that name. A familiar voice hissed just behind Cinder's ear. And I don't care. Its owner gave the edge a vicious wrench, tearing through muscle. All this started with you. Now it'll end with you. Cinder ripped the blade free and sprang back. Neo stalked after her. The maiden swept a hand up at her, flames blazing in her palm. Naruto's hand caught the blast and snuffed it out, a blown candle against the wind. Cinder dove past him with a wicked smile, and Neo realized too late that she'd been drawn in, exposed to a brutal crosscut. Blistering blades passed a hair's breadth over her throat as she swayed away. Another near miss. A wave of golden light Naruto bolted before she could capitalize on the moment, neatly severing Cinder's left arm. She tumbled back, clutching her shoulder with a hoarse cry. You again. Me sightless eyes met hers. Did you really think I'd let you get away? Cinder's only response was another scream, as Neo looked on her back arched and a ghastly black limb burst from the length of her mangled shoulder. No, not just an arm. That thing was shadow incarnate. Wretched, twisted, in the worst of ways. Neo's stomach roiled in disgust at the sight. Well, that certainly told a tale all its own, didn't it? She'd been hiding that thing under the bandages. Sensible. And hideous. Ghastly. She really had become a monster. Look what's become of you. Naruto shook his head. You've sold your soul for strength. Shut up, she hissed the words through gritted teeth. Where the hell he's at him? Where he cocked a blonde brow at her. Where do you think? Cinder whirled, and her lone eye narrowed upon a still form only yards away, slumped against a wall. Already useless Faunus. At least he fought for a cause, twisted though it was. Naruto's staff slammed into her throat, cutting her diatribe short. You just want power. Cinder stumbled back, clutching at her neck with her grim limb. Naruto stalked after, sightless eyes intent. Neo matched him step for step. How does it feel? Fall. Naruto's voice boomed out ahead of her, and he struck first before Cinder could, slamming a strange snarling sphere into Cinder's chest. To be deconstructed, she crashed away, Aura shredding to pieces beneath the keening orb. To be the victim, she thrashed upright, battered and bloodied, only to be kicked down again. Hurts, doesn't it? Her blade swiped out and was summarily deflected for its efforts. Kill for kill, eye for eye, blood for blood. Time to die. Her cries of pain were sweet, sweet music to Neo's ears. More than that, they centered her. She'd nearly lost herself to rage and gone on a rampage. Anger wouldn't bring Roman back. She certainly couldn't avenge him if she was dead. No, anger could come later. Revenge was a dish best served cold, after all. Steeling herself, she abandoned her assault and melted into the mist. A moment's reprieve allowed her to focus and weave another illusion. It gave her time to focus. For all his handicap, Naruto was tearing Cinder apart. Flames parted before his staff. Indeed, he fended her off with almost lazy ease. Was he toying with her, dragging out her agony? Neo didn't know. A better person might have let them duke it out alone, let them preserve some vestige of honor. Neo was anything but honorable. To be fair, Cinder reacted very quickly, far faster than most huntresses would have thought possible. She immolated the clone, blocked a flung knife through the shadows, and slammed her blades down to birth a mighty explosion that blasted them apart. The effort cost her and drove the maiden to a knee. Sweat beaded from her brow. Wasted, gasping for air, she pushed herself upright. I won't die here, she railed, eye wide and red. I'm meant for more than this, I have destiny. Yes, Naruto kicked out, catching her in the chin. You do. Neo slipped closer in the mist. Cinder screamed. Why won't you die? Fall fought well. Didn't make a lick of difference. Naruto dismantled her. He was almost sad, really. Jab to the ribs. Closer she crept. He hacked away half Cinder's ear as the maiden tumbled to safety. Hush slipped free of its hidden scabbard with a silent click. Cinder lashed out with yet more fire, and he walked right through it, uncaring of his burns. There at last, Fall's resolve began to falter. Cinder, has this ever worked? She tried to retreat. She really did, she just wasn't quick enough. He caught her by the wrist and reeled her in, a stunned fish upon a hook. You took my eyes. In an instant, he was upon her. His forehead kissed hers like a lover's might. Now I'll take yours. His hand swept past in a cruel claw, hooked into the side of Cinder's face and twisted. Blood spattered a wall. The scream that followed eclipsed all others. Neo grit her teeth against the wail that followed. It reminded her of a little girl who'd lost everything she'd ever known. It was an awful keening sound, one that had even Naruto flinching despite herself. But he didn't give in, didn't relent, didn't show mercy. Claw's fingers came away, leaving Cinder with a ruined hole in the right side of her head. She slumped with a gasp, weeping scarlet tears. Her hair shifted a little, and for a moment, she glimpsed the other side of her face, a scarred ruin. She'd lost the other eye long ago. Cinder dropped to her knees, unable to do anything more than weep. I'm sorry, here at last, her voice warbled, so much that of a child. I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. Eye for an eye. Naruto ignored her, considering his prize. As Neo looked on in quiet consternation, he removed a scroll from his pouch and sealed the bloody orb within. Cinder didn't even notice. She continued to babble at his feet. What was she apologizing for? Neo didn't know. Didn't care. She saw her chance and surged forward. Cinder's back was to her. She might well hear her coming, but with both eyes gone, well, the less said the better. 3 steps away now. 2, 1. Neo swung down. Naruto's craggy visage softened. I forgive you. Hush slammed into Cinder's chest and burst out her back. Cinder didn't scream, didn't curse her, didn't even react, not at first. Instead, the fall maiden swayed in surprise, mouth open to form a round O of genuine surprise. She looked down, realized she couldn't, and grasped feebly at the blade protruding from her flesh. When she finally looked up with, her eyeless expression seemed almost lost, somehow. Like a little girl gaping at her father. Buryo said you forgave me. I did. Naruto's head bobbed. But I never forget. And you owe Neo a debt. Yes, a debt that was now paid. Blood for blood. Neo ripped her blade free with a vicious twist, leaving Cinder to pitch forward onto her stomach. Such a sight brought her more relief than a dozen deaths. The mastermind collapsed with a gurgle, catching herself on her grim arm, only for the limb to crumble away into ash. She landed on her back and did not rise again. Her chest twitched, frantically trying to draw in air, only to fail. A tiny wheeze fled fro her lips, leaving the air to shimmer around her. Somehow, she still spoke. Naruto. The wounded warrior shook his head and sat beside her. I'm here. Blood bubbled at her lips. Do you? She coughed once. Remember Mistral. Crimson pooled at his feet, slowly staining his trousers scarlet. His head bowed a little. Yeah. A small, broken smile curled the corner of her ruined mouth. We should have stayed in that cave. His shoulders trembled. Neo turned her head aside and spat. The sound seemed to reactivate Cinder, if only for a moment. And you, that sightless gaze found hers. You know not what you've unleashed. A tiny croak of laughter left her lips, rattling off into a cough. Ya were never meant to win here. For this, you will suffer more than you know. Her bloodied lips curled in a cruel grin of spite. It's a shame I won't live to see it. We've had enough suffering for one lifetime. Naruto sat down beside her. If someone wants to hate us, they're more than welcome. I'll bear that burden gladly. Cinder's lips thinned. You always were stubborn. Naruto chuckled ruefully. So were you. Silence reigned. Cinder. She didn't answer. She'd stopped breathing. The life had already left her body. Goodbye, partner. Naruto whispered softly. Neo released a breath of her own. Her shoulders slumped. Her knees buckled, leaving her to sprawl out beside her ally. For a moment, she felt something. A strange feeling overcame her. It wasn't guilt or any emotion she knew, but it persisted regardless. She shook it off just as quickly, scrubbing at her eyes. They felt hot, itchy, not with tears, but something else. It could wait. She'd figure out this strange feeling later. High above them, the slakery sky finally released its bounty. Rain crashed down from the clouds, fitfully at first, but within moments it strengthened from a steady pitter-patter to heavy sheets. Of course it would rain. She squinted up at it, eyes gone narrow. Nasty weather. They'd catch cold if they stayed out here. But neither moved. Her eyes continued to itch. She scrubbed them yet again and resolved herself to ignore whatever this was. Naruto must have felt the weight of her gaze on his shoulders, because he shifted a little where he sat. When he raised his gaze, she was alarmed to find a sorrowful expression etched across his face. She was a better person, once. He muttered the words almost to himself. Before all this, silence passed between the two of them, broken only by the rain above. And then, without warning, Naruto slumped over, sprawling in the street. Sleep sounded nice right about now. Sleepy. Darkness took her moments later. It really was a terrible day for rain. And yet still it poured down over the cemetery, as if the very heavens were mourning Cinder's death. Neo certainly wasn't a fan. She loved cloudy days. Make no mistake, frankly it was easier to use her illusions than, but storms like this, no. Nope. Nay. Never. Negative rain was a pain. Rainy days were meant for snuggling up in bed with a bow of ice cream and a bottle of something strong. Not the ice. Warm and safe beneath her reinforced parasol, she watched Naruto set the gravestone into place. Cinder's body had been buried long ago, consigned to the dirt. Well, what was left of it? She'd taken a few discreet shots when Blondie wasn't around to make certain that bitch wouldn't rise again. You couldn't well move without a heart and a brain after all. Better safe than sorry. Still, why did Naruto mourn Cinder? You didn't bury your enemies with full honors. You didn't rip their eye out and seal it away like some kind of grisly trophy. You certainly didn't stand over their grave in the middle of the pouring rain looking miserable. No, there was more than meets the eye here. Neo frowned and began to tap her foot. For the life of her, she just couldn't understand why. Naruto had called Cinder partner there, at the end. She'd heard that. Had they been allies once, friends, lovers, something more or less, who knew? Cinder had taken her secrets to the grave, and Naruto didn't seem keen on airing her dirty laundry. To say nothing of Adam Taurus. She didn't know why they'd spared the terrorist, much less dragged him back to the spiders for treatment. Little Miss Malachite and her boys would see him patched up as best they could, but there could be no denying the damage that was done. His ears would be a total loss. He'd be lucky to survive. As she looked on, Naruto clasped his hands together and bowed his head. She had to strain to hear the words over the rain. May you find peace. Peace. The little assassin scowled and shook her head. Too many questions. Cinder didn't deserve peace. She deserved to burn in the blackest pit for the rest of her afterlife. And yet once again, Naruto treated his fallen enemy with respect she didn't deserve. Neo longed to get to the bottom of it, but in the same vein, she wanted to let him be. She'd been a disaster after she lost Roman. Hadn't eaten or slept for days on end. She would have died herself were it not for revenge. Her gaze narrowed on Naruto. Maybe it was best to let him grieve. Let him get it out of his system, you know. Her right eye began to twitch. Oh gods, she was starting to sound like him now. He'd infected her. There was no going back from this. Didn't help that her eyes were still burning. They'd been like this for a while now. She felt sick and not in the usual way, as if her own aura were roiling out of control. That didn't make any sense. She hadn't been poisoned, she knew all the signs. Cinder barely scratched her during their bout. Nausea bubbled up in her and she shoved it back down with a scowl. On a whim, she made a snap decision and stepped forward. No one should grieve alone, because at the end of the day, Cinder Fall was gone. Dead and buried. She wouldn't be coming back. No miracle for her, no last-minute resurrection or any such bullshit to pluck life from the jaws of death. Well, unless she rose from her grave as a zombie or something. Just the thought of the mighty Cinder shambling about as a blind zombie gave her more pleasure than a dozen lying schemers. You're dead now, Cinder. She turned her head and spat into the mud. You're never coming back. With a spring in her step, she sashayed her way to Naruto's silent side. He didn't even seem to notice her. Well, she'd changed that. Time she staked her claim once and for all. He's mine now. Neo reached over and claimed his hand, threading her small fingers within his. Whatever he and Cinder had been, it didn't matter. Dead women told no tales. Didn't matter. He'd delivered her vengeance and more. Cinder was maggot food. Roman had been avenged. He could rest now. She'd found herself a new partner, someone she was comfortable with, someone who understood her. She'd be. But was it really over? Her mind began to whirl as she glared down at the psychopath's grave. Cinder clearly took orders from somebody. She'd all but said as much, which meant someone had orchestrated this mess. If Cinder was the spark that started the fire, a fire which burned her old life down, then someone else must have struck the match first. Were they the true culprit behind this? If so, her vengeance wasn't complete, wasn't it? Cinder was gone. No doubt Roman was cackling up in heaven. But if someone remained, if a third party had started this, could she really let them be? Neo knew her answer. I'll find the one who pulled Cinder's strings. The little mute thought to herself. Then I'll kill them, too. She squeezed his hand. Some spark of life crept back into Naruto then, because those white-filmed eyes blinked slowly. Thank you. Something in his jaw clenched. Don't worry, I didn't forget. Hold still. Neo blinked, not quite comprehending the sudden turn. Forget what's he on about, Wuig. Her thoughts dissolved into mindless gibberish and the world burned as Naruto whirled, then touched his right hand to her neck. Liquid fire coursed through Neo's chest. Chakra plunged into her vocal cords, restoring the shriveled organs to life and luster. Something popped in her throat. The pain grew worse, so much so that she gasped softly, and made the first sound of her life. Fathert. Naruto's brow shot straight to his hairline. Well, I'll be damned. He laughed then, and the sound set her blood aflame. You really do have a lovely voice. Neo clapped both hands over her mouth. Her voice was low and dangerous, the voice of a grown woman. As expected, of course. Still to hear a heat pricked at her mismatching eyes, not tears of sorrow, but sheer bloody joy. She'd lived her entire life without speaking so much as a single word. Born without a voice, unable to even scream as a child. To suddenly have that given back to her, it was too much. The dam burst all at once, sending tears coursing down her cheeks. Water ran down her face as she hiccuped. The hiccup became a sob. That sob morphed into a wail, one that she buried against his chest. Little whispery sobs trickled into the rain. Tailing hurts. She said as much. Why does it hurt? Your voice is gonna be weak for a bit. Don't worry. His hand came down on her head, easing the worst of her worries. You haven't spoken all your life. Your vocal cords are like a muscle that you need to train. You should be fine in a few weeks, if not days. Her eyes met his. Naruto frowned down at her. Neo. She could only think of one way to repay him. Oh, who was she kidding? She wanted him. Here and now. Rain, who cared about a little rain, so stood on the very tips of her toes and pressed her lips to his. He made a noise of surprise, yet his arms curled about her nevertheless. His mouth was warm on hers, hesitant, yet lingering. Then she saw her reflection in those blind orbs. Neo, what's wrong? Wait, what was that? What was that? Casting about, she searched for the next reflective surface she could find. It awaited her in a nearby puddle. She blinked, alarmed by the reflection staring back at her. Her eyes were burning. No, literally burning like they were on fire. Mismatched heat stemmed from her eyes, trailing outward to hiss steam and flame in the rain. Aura roiled within her, hot and angry, like a raging inferno, causing her eyes to ache anew. Oh, her mind bucked. That's why they were hurting all this time. This eyes couldn't be good, could it? Probably not. Leagues away, someone took notice. Salem looked up from her throne. Blood-red eyes drifted open, crinkling in a smile. Well, this was a new wrinkle, wasn't it? How very unexpected. It would seem dear Cinder has perished after all. Her voice didn't betray even the merest hint of emotion as she addressed those at the table. Such a pity. Emerald Sustrai blinked. Once, twice, thrice, before the words hit. She tried to speak. No words emerged. Her lips flapped uselessly as she sucked in a ragged gasp of air. Tan hands rose, cupping her face. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Hope. So powerful, so painful. To be given idly to have it taken away days later, there could be no crueler torment. No greater pain. Salem saw the precise moment the girl's mind went to pieces, watched as Emerald's world shattered like so much broken glass, observed as Emerald sank to her knees. Then she screamed. She kept screaming until she broke. Salem savored every second of her delicious torment. Victory. Truly, Neo felt it bore repeating. Silken sheets tickled her naked form as she sprawled out among the covers, reveling in the warm body pressed against hers. She didn't mind being the little spoon. It wasn't half bad, really. Naruto's arms were warm and strong around her, this close she could hear his heartbeat. Here and now, it was all she needed. Lazy days were always the best, and she'd had an entire lazy month to herself since they'd buried Cinder's body. Just thinking of her worm food now put a smile on her face. She had taken everything from Cinder in the end. Her power, her partner, her life. Her body was rotting in the ground, while Neo was alive, reveling in her triumph. Killing that wretched woman had brought her more relief than 1,000 crimes. Was it enough? She wondered about that sometimes. Didn't she have those two brats with her? She barely remembered their names. Emma and Mark. No, that wasn't it. But if they were that important, she'd remember. Would they seek revenge? Maybe. The green-haired one had seemed devoted enough for all the good it would do her. She'd had the measure of the little illusionist long before the fall of Beacon. Her powers had doubled since they'd last met. Preening at her triumph, the new maiden raised her free hand and focused, calling upon her new power. After a month, she'd learned to summon it, albeit sporadically. Her eyes flashed with fire. An ethereal flame sprang to life in her palm. Blue embers blossomed there, hotter than anything Cinder could ever hope to conjure. Her mind gave it a nudge, pushing it into a new shape. Sapphire became scarlet, red as blood. And from those hellish flames, a flower was born. Red like roses. There was a certain irony to be had there. Neo scowled at it, turning it over in her fingers as she considered her next move. Revenge was a dish best served cold, but hers had been white hot by the end. And yet she felt unfulfilled. That girl, Little Reg, was not entirely blameless, but neither could she called wholly at fault, either. Besides, Cinder had put that idea in her head and she resolved to ignore it if only to spite her spirit. Still, she wanted to look her in the eye, if only to ask why. Her fingers flexed and the rose bloomed into a lovely phoenix, spreading its wings. Hey, what are you doing? Neo's concentration faltered, causing the bird to fall about in her grasp. It became little more than embers in her grasp. She scowled up past it. At him. Sorry, didn't mean to spook you. Naruto smiled down at her, very much awake, his sightless eyes looking past her. You were being awfully still there for a bit. She smacked his chest for good measure. Use your words, Neo. Her lips pursed in a frown. Right, she had a voice now. She'd need to use it more often if she wanted to strengthen her vocal cords. And yet she liked silence. Words were wonderful to be sure, but give her body language any day. She wasn't used to talking. She'd gone her entire life living in silence, and to suddenly be granted a reprieve from that. This time, she chose to show her affections in a more physical manner. Writhing in his arms, Neo turned and kissed his chin, followed by his ear, her lips planting trailing kisses across his skin. Again, Naruto must have felt the weight of her regard, because he laughed. You're insatiable. She shoved him down and fastened her mouth to his once more. His body was warm against hers, her lips in inferno. You have the stamina for it, and you know it. Aha, she speaks. No, she decided as she climbed atop Naruto and mounted the bemused blonde. It wasn't enough to kill Cinder. She wanted to destroy her legacy. Her plots, her schemes, all that she ever was and ever would be. Just as that bitch had ruined Roman's empire, so too would she ruin everyone in association with her. But there would be time for vengeance later, time once she'd mastered her new powers. Her hips began to move against him as he filled her, to which his hands settled on her hips. Together, they fell into a familiar rhythm. She had a new partner, now. Hers. All hers. And she wouldn't lose him. Neo swore it. Well, aren't you too adorable? Finally claimed him, have you? Naruto uttered a jaw-popping yawn at Miss Malachite as he all but sprawled himself out on the couch. Neo plunked down on his chest, drawing a grunt from him. So much for sitting up. She seemed determined to leave a mark on him these days. He didn't even have it in him to push her away. You know what they say, love is blind. Speaking of which, Neo and Naruto looked up as one. Look, I don't mean to get your hopes up, but beneath their gaze, Miss Malachite sighed and tented her fingers. I might be able to do something about that blindness of yours. Do you still have Cinder's eye? You said you sealed it away. I do and I did. Naruto's brow furrowed. I don't like the sound of this. Neo flicked a forehead and pressed a finger to his lips. Naruto demurred with a sigh. Fine, fine. What she was suggesting stirred a strange feeling in him, one he'd not felt in a long time. He'd come to accept his blindness as both penance and punishment alike. If she was offering what he thought she was, well, her semblance had always been a versatile one. A bit of surgery wasn't impossible. Not with her gift. Unlikely, but not impossible. He hadn't been able to take and implant an eye, if only because many of they were too weak to house his vision. But Cinder's eyes had been powerful, filled with the might of a maiden before her untimely demise. Little Miss Malachite preened beneath his gaze. Don't fret, darlin'. I've never let you down. A smile quirked at his scarred face. Well, there was that one time in Vale. She flung up her arms. "One time and you never let me live it down." Laughter spilled through the spider's parlor. "So what do you say?" Naruto looked to Neo. The little minx nodded. His shoulders slumped in a sigh. "I better not regret this." Why isn't he waking up? Because he wasn't. No, not at all. For the life of her, Neo couldn't understand why. It had been a successful operation. They'd put Naruto in a clean room, he'd chain himself into a bed to prevent any unpleasantness on his body's part, and then gone to sleep. No fuss, no muss, nothing out of the ordinary. Once he was properly sedated, Miss Malachite went to work with her semblance, that versatile gift of hers that allowed her to do the impossible. Neo still shivered a little at the memory of it. Even now she wasn't quite sure what that suture-like ability with the stitches had been, and frankly, she didn't want to know. Seeing it once was more than enough. "Thank you kindly." Malachite's semblance was not a kind one, but it was effective. With it she'd been able to successfully extract Naruto's right eye, which was then replaced with cinders. There was a bitter irony to be had there. Her eye would, in theory, grant him the gift of sight once more. Even in death, Cinderfall was still suffering for all the wrong she'd done and more. Or it should once he finally woke up. He hadn't moved for nearly a day, now. Neo watched Naruto like a hawk, searching for the slightest sign of consciousness and finding few. Her pale palm glided across his face, seeking his brow. Naruto still didn't stir. His body was warm to the touch and his pulse strong even as he lay sprawled out on simple cot. Yet he wouldn't wake. His eyes were shut tight. Nothing could open them. She would know, she'd already tried. Were it not for the faint rise and fall of his chest, she would have thought him dead. Speaking of dead, Neo cast a nasty glare over her shoulder, realizing she had yet to receive any answers. "Don't give me that look." Miss Malachite lounged on a plush couch and puffed on a pipe, utterly at her ease. "I did the best I could for him." Although, she thumbed her chin, eyes are a funny thing. Why, some even say they're the window to the soul. A faint smile touched her full lips. "Maybe your boy's having himself a nice dream about your dead friend." Naruto growled in his sleep, almost as if he were in pain. Neo absolutely hissed. "A dream about Cinder, not if she had anything to say about it. When he wakes up, and don't worry your pretty little head because he will," their ally barreled on, "it might be a while before he can see proper." Something of her confusion must have shown, because the bubbly blonde hastened to elaborate. "He's been blind for a while now. I don't know what kind of sixth sense or echolocation he's been using to get around these days, but well, it's a bit like you and your voice." Neo touched one hand to her throat and plonked down on the seat beside her. All the while, she kept Naruto's body in her peripherals. If this was a trick or a prank of some sort, they'd rue the day. "It helps if you think of it as a muscle of sorts," Malachite elucidated with a raised finger. "You haven't felt the need to speak in years." Right at her nod, her cheeks dimple in a smile. "Well, let me tell you, it's the same for him in his vision. He's used to seeing things differently. This'll be a change for him." "How much of a change?" "Enough for him to be vulnerable, at least for a little bit." She turned back and considered the prone blonde with a keen eye. "Or maybe not. No way of knowing until he wakes up." The illusionist tapped a foot, betraying her impatience. Much to her chagrin, the gangster met her stare for stare. "You really do care about him, don't you? I never thought I'd see the day." Mushy feelings. Neo felt a hint of hot pink hit her cheeks. Her head snapped to the side, breaking their deadlock. "Because he's like your old partner." "No." She shook her head, not truly trusting herself to words. She choked a little, frowned, then massaged her still sore throat. "He kept his promise. I need him." A pale brow quirked. "Want or need?" Neo refused to answer, for all the good it did her. Insufferable woman. She actually had the gall to smirk as she stood and swatted her on the shoulder. A quick backstep took her to the door. With one last lingering glance at the slumbering blonde, she sashayed away and eased the battered wooden frame shut behind her. "I'll leave the two of you alone." Neo looked left. Neo looked right. Neo made sure no one was near. Even then she counted to 9 for good measure. Only then did she scramble off the couch and scamper towards her partner. Naruto didn't respond in the least. She ran a hand across his chest, up his neck and across his chin. He didn't budge. Pale fingers glided the length of his nose and came to rest upon his eyes. She felt her own begin to burn, not with flames this time, but tears. He was all right. He had to be. He must be. The alternative was unacceptable. She couldn't stomach a second loss. Her new powers boiled just under the surface, responding to her stress, longing for release. She stamped them down with a snarl and laid her head on his chest. Thump, thump, thump. There it was, his heartbeat still going so strong. She took some solace in that. Beyond that, he remained still under her hands, wholly unresponsive. On a whim she tried to channel her gifts outward, directing them toward his new eye. Nothing, not even a spark. A seed of anxiety took root in her heart and burrowed deep. She laid her head on his chest and closed her eyes. It couldn't end this way. It just couldn't. "Please don't die." A groan arose from below her. Now where's the fun in something like that? The matching eyes snapped open, alarmed to find someone staring back. Her world ground to a halt. "Hey." Naruto raised a hand in a lazy greeting. "Did I miss anything?" Neo toppled backward with a very unladylike yelp and fell to the floor. God, sneaky boy, she'd have his head for this. Because at long last, Naruto had opened his eyes. "Well, Neo supposed as she watched him rise from the table. He swung his legs off the table and landed with that same eerie grace of his, the peerless balance that shouldn't be possible for a blind man. His leftmost orb remained a milky blue-white, but now his right, Cinder's eye, was fire with light and life. It almost seemed to shimmer when she stared at it overlong. His gaze swept across the room, widening, narrowing, widening again now. Before it settled on her, he looked down at her, saw her, and smiled. She knew it when he knelt before her, cupped her cheek, and pressed his forehead to hers. His thumb stroked her face. A singular, "Well, hello, beautiful." His voice was dry, but to her it was the sweetest of honey. "Nice to see you." Always with the puns, but here and now she didn't mind. Nope, not one bit. The last thread of Neo's restraint snapped with an audible twang. Mine, hers, hers, hers. All hers. She dove on him with a snarl and crushed her mouth against his, smashing him down to the floor. He tasted so sweet, like ice cream. She wanted to devour him. He inhaled sharply through his nose and gripped her by the waist, fingers crushing against her hips. Her own tore at his jacket as his palms moved upward now, seeking the buttons of her blouse. Clothes ripped. Buttons flew through the air. Her skin blazed with fire as his hands roved upward, cupping her breasts even as she found his belt and yanked it away. At him someone coughed. "Sorry to interrupt, but..." Both turned to find Miss Malachite's head poking out the door. She grinned at them, utterly unrepentant for her crimes, and waved a hand cheerily. "As touching as this heartfelt little reunion is, there's someone else I'd like you to check in on." Who was he? The question had haunted the man ever since he awoke to find himself like this. He had been caged, he knew that much, shackled and bound like some sort of animal. His body was likewise trapped, arms and legs restrained, all but shackled to a wall, locked in such a way that he found his limbs all but sprawled. The pain was constant, denying him even the thinnest pretense of rest. How long had he been in this cell? Days, weeks, months? He remembered so very little. His body clearly recalled something of his past, for its movements remained crisp and clean in spite of his uncertainty. He could feel the strength of his arms, the telltale crackle of his aura as it protested the chains tying him down, binding him to the ground. Had he a weapon, he was sure he could have cut his way out of here. He wasn't sure how he knew this, only that he did. And as he awaited his fate, he seethed. His sole solace was his anger, a constant companion that dogged his every step. The man didn't even know who or what he was angry with her about, only that he was. It made his horns itch. He longed to reach up and scratch them, but the chains prevented even that. When he tried to move them, and was rewarded only with stiffness, and he felt them shift against his arms, the heavy links no doubt dragging against one another, yet no sound emerged. And there was another wrinkle, the tattered tapestry of his life. You see, the man couldn't hear. Not a thing, save the constant ringing in his ears. Sight, touch, smell, even taste, these senses were still his to command, but that last one remained elusive, ever out of his grasp. Why, yet another question to which he lacked an answer. Had he been injured in battle? Somehow the pain in his ears was beginning to drive him mad. He'd pondered these questions for days now, and answers had yet to come. He had begged his captors for them, prayed to the gods for them, for something, anything. Today they answered. He saw rather than heard his cell door open, watched it part on greased hinges, to reveal his guests. A blond stranger with eyes of blue and gold strode in, his very step shadowed by what the man first assumed to be a little girl. He soon realized the error of his ways. No, those were undoubtedly the curves of a young woman. No child, this. She was undoubtedly something more than that. Even her eyes were different, shimmering faintly with tongues of flames. Somehow the sight of her frightened him than the other on. They tried to speak with them. Rather, she did. He saw her lips move. No sound emerged. He cocked his head. "I cannot hear you. Do you know who I am?" The pair exchanged a baffled look, followed by a nod. "My name," the man croaked the words out, unable to tell if they were formed proper. "If you know, tell me, I beg of you." For an awful moment nothing happened. Then the blonde pulled a scroll from his pocket and typed out a message, one he revealed not a moment later. A single word awaited him on that digital screen. Adam. A small piece of the puzzle clicked into his mind. Adam. He had a name again. Identity. Meaning. It soothed his savage soul, gave him something to cling to in the waters of madness. And cling he did, for it was all that he had. The blonde one knelt before him and loosened the chains binding his arms, allowing him to slump to the floor. It was a small mercy, but he reveled in it, for it eased the horrid pain in his shoulders. Another note came and went before his eyes, longer than the first. "I'm going to try and do something about your ears." His head bowed. "Please." The stranger held out both hands, bathing his palms in emerald glow. Adam eyed them warily, not quite trusting him. But what did he have to lose? Nothing, and everything to gain. Chin up, he nodded once and steeled his spine, bracing himself. His memory may well be a mangled mess, but if they could at least rid him of this horrid ringing in his earspain. A raw scream tore itself for him, and for a wonderful moment, he heard it, his voice tinged with pain. But only a moment. Then it slipped away from him and deafness descended once more. Adam grit his teeth. The blonde tried again, laying both hands upon either side of his head. Pain came again. Adam felt a molar crack somewhere in the back of his jaw. Sweat beaded across his brow. His arms trembled. He wasn't sure how long the stranger knelt like that, trying to undo the damage that had been done, only that he did. Eventually, he leaned back. The scroll came up again. "I'm sorry." It read, "Something's wrong with your inner ear. Don't think I can fix it." Somehow that hurt even more than his lost memories. To never hear the beauty of music again, to not know the sound of his own voice, it made his soul ache. For a single wild moment Adam's mind shifted in his grief and he was granted a singular second of clarity. In it he saw a girl with striking golden eyes and flowing hair cut from darkness itself. Little more than an image, a specter of memory he couldn't recall. Her voice, he couldn't remember what it sounded like. Her face, he knew it, and yet he knew it not, for it was vague and indistinct. What did she sound like? Who was she? A friend, love, more or less? It was too much. Something came undone. Adam felt a growl rumble in his chest, but he couldn't hear it. Couldn't hear anything. Nothing at all, save for that God-awful ringing in his ears. It wasn't fair. His mind was a mess, and the cold reality of his fate proved more than he was willing to comprehend. Leave me. He looked up, scowled when he saw they were still there. I said get out. They did as he wished. He waited until they were gone. Only then did he allow himself to break. Adam buried his head in both hands and wept. Both for what he was and what he could have been. Neo had never been to Atlas before. She knew it was cold and all, that one should dress warmly, but beyond that she knew precious little. Truth be told, she didn't much relish the idea of going in blind, but there was no other alternative here. She was ready to find her answers, ready to know who was behind this, ready to put Roman's spirit to rest once and for all, ready to make an end of things, one way or another. And really, she rather liked her new fur coat. With a merry little hum the former mute glanced down at herself, admiring the pink and white cream fabric. Her favorite colors. It would keep her warm in the harsh climate of Salidas, if nothing else. Thin layers wouldn't cut it where they were going, and really, why would she want to wear less? She'd freeze. Naruto stepped up beside her, ready to depart. Guess you liked my gift. She nodded once, performing a little twirl on the sidewalk. He flicked her forehead for it. Use your words. Neo kicked his shin. Piss off. He pulled her into his side and bent down to kiss her forehead. Now that's more like it. You really do have a lovely voice. Neo tugged at his sleeve, tried to speak, only to fail miserably. Right. Words. Calm down and use them. Her face flamed with shame. Damn him for bringing out her girly side. Her eyes flashed with flame before she could bring them under control again. Naruto saw it at once. He held her that much closer. How do you feel? She shrugged. Tired. Feels weird. And it did. Cinder's power was hers, but she still struggled with it. All heat and fire and rage, it ached to be unleashed. It was not doing wonders for her temper at the moment. Or maybe there was something else. Nope. She shook her head furiously. Don't think about it. Naruto stared at her for a long, ponderous moment. You're certain you want to go through with this? We haven't left yet. It's not too late. Neo fixed him with a harrowing stare. All right, I'm not satisfied with an ending like this, either. Her partner looked away and thumbed his chin as he considered the city of Mistral sprawled out below them. Cinder used to be a better person. Until someone twisted her. She acted like she was taking orders from someone. Neo's temper reared its ugly head. Again with Cinder. Cinder. Honestly, she was hearing more of her after her death than she had when she was alive. Don't think about her. Think about me. A thought struck her. Wanna know what I'm wearing under this? She leaned up and whispered something into his ear. Huh. Naruto grinned. Pink lace. Tinky. Shut up and kiss me. He did, sending a little thrill shooting through her body. I do hate to interrupt this little shindig, Miss Malachite offered from the side. But before you go, I'd recommend stopping in an Argus first. Naruto gave her an odd look. Why, darling, Atlas has all but closed off its borders to anyone not of their kingdom. The crime lord took a long puff of her pipe and exhaled deeply. Trust me, if those runts wanted to make it there, and my sources say they do, Argus is the only place they can possibly go. Neo wrinkled her nose. Noted. The portly woman sighed. You really aren't one for thank Ios, are you? But I am. Thanks for your help. Naruto pulled a thick sheaf of pale vellum from his pouch. I've got something for you. Neo frowned as she realized he had rolled into a scroll, an actual scroll, not the phones they used. He'd even bound it with wax and string alike. There was a strange seal etched into the crimson material, almost like a spiral of some sort. And was it just her, or was it glowing? Surely that was her imagination. Paper didn't gloat at it. She scrubbed at her eyes as he slipped away from her and offered it to his old friend. No, it was almost certainly glowing. Why, give these to Milsha and Melanie. The blonde pushed the items into Miss Malachite's arms. I'm sure they'll appreciate the lessons. Malachite accepted the gifts with a huff. They'd like you to come back in one piece, you hear. Naruto coughed into a fist. Well, I'm going to try. Do or do not. She pinched his cheek, drawing a whine from the normally recalcitrant warrior. There is no try. I won't belling my girls why their uncle ran off and Gold himself killed. All right, he groaned, flailing a little when she gave him a hard yank. I'll come back alive, promise I won't take any chances out there. Now let me go. Good. She released his face, to which he beat a hasty retreat. Speaking o' chances, there's someone here to see you before you depart. Neo bristled as the sound of footsteps pervaded the landing zone. Sure enough, she turned to find a familiar face limping their way. Leaning heavily upon his sheathed sword, Adam Taurus nevertheless carried himself with dignity and pride. His good eye remained fixed firmly upon them, refusing to waver in spite of his exhaustion. Dead though he was, the swordsman saw the anger writ across her face. It gave him pause. In that pause, Neo drew hush with an angry hiss. You let him out. Malachite shrugged. He was rather persuasive. I mean you no harm. On the contrary, his free hand rose slowly to show himself harmless, his voice pitched just a little too loud to compensate for his lack of hearing. I'm here help you. Please. He bowed his head in a way the old Adam never would have done. Take me with you. Naruto and Neo exchanged a sour look. The former found his voice first. I don't think that's a good idea. There was an awful silence. Adam stared back at them without guile. Did you say something? Right, he's deaf. Here. Naruto fished out his scroll, punched in 2 keys, and held them up to be seen. No, I wasn't asking. The redhead set his jaw. My mind is broken and my ears ruined, but I remember how to wield a sword. I won't slow you down. Oh, for the love of just watch. Malachite snatched an empty vase and flung it pebble at his back. Adam didn't even look back. Wilt flared. Blush barked. Shattered porcelain clattered to the floor. I am not weak. Adam sheathed his blade and brandished it at them. I still have my skills and my semblance, if not my memories. I will not slow you down. Naruto made a noise of discontent. Neo pinched the bridge of her nose. Did they dare take the risk? Naruto clearly felt guilty for maiming him. And yet, I beg of you, I need to know who I am. Adam knelt and prostrated himself before them, pressing his head to the floor. I won't betray you. I won't turn on you. You have my word. His word. HMMPH. What good was the word of a terrorist? Memory loss or not, she'd heard the stories. Adam was a monster. He might not be one now, but his memories could come back at any time. He was a flight risk no matter how you looked at it. Roman would have called him a liability. He wasn't wrong. The only thing this fool deserved was a bullet in the brain. Naruto winced. Adam, it's really not that simple. The faunus bowed yet further. I beg of you. Neo saw Naruto's face twitch, then. She knew what he was going to say even before she said it. To softy. He held out for at least 5 seconds before his resolve crumbled. Say what you would about his skills, but he really did have a soft spot for pity cases like this. All right, get up. Naruto tugged at his cloak. Argus it is, then. Should be able to get us there pretty quickly. But you cause one bit of trouble and you're gone. Neo held up her scroll, revealing a summarized version of what he'd said. Adam sprang to his feet. You won't regret this. See to it that we don't. Neo, hold on tight. Neo hopped onto his back and did as he asked. Hey, no complaints here. If he was willing to give her a ride, she wasn't about to complain. Nope. Naruto shook his head. Not enough. Dig your fingers in. I mean it. She held tighter still, arms constricting around him like a clingy viper. Better, came the grunt. Here. He produced a shadow clone and out a bit of cord, to which she let the former tie her to the original. Adam suffered the same with a clone of his own, bearing it with quiet indifference. All right. Naruto arched his back. The action did pleasant things to his lean body. Next stop, Argus. Good luck, dears. Miss Malachite waved. Be sure and come visit once this is all over. Neo squeezed his back with a grin. Forward, valiant steed. There was no word, no warning, no transition between one moment and the next. Naruto stood there a sliver of a second longer, smiling over his shoulder. And then, zoom, his body flashed gold and their world absolutely blurred. From her perch between his shoulders, Neo felt the world lurch around her. She clung on hard, eyes watering as her ride sped forward. Their world became a blur. How could he see? And any sound she tried to make was all but swallowed up by a cold wind. It lashed at her as nothing else had in her life, trying to tear her from his back. Yet for all that she felt rather warm. She looked down and saw why. Naruto's body was glowing gold and black, burning like a blast furnace against her breasts and other places. Oh, that felt rather nice, actually. He hit a bump and Neo grinned, holding a little tighter as she settled in for a long ride. Before long they left the land entirely. She saw the ocean ahead, only to gasp as Naruto lengthened his stride and ran clear across it. Destiny awaited them both, beyond the horizon. She would have the answers she sought, one way or another. You're being foolish. Emerald snorted as she tore the bullhead cockpit open. Don't try to stop me, Hazel. I have to do this. Did she really? Hazel understood the sentiment, though he didn't much appreciate it. Reckless didn't even begin to describe what she was doing. He had done some crazy things indeed in his day, but running off half-cocked in search of vengeance, wait. He'd done that, too. He supposed she did. She was dressed for the weather, if nothing else. Do you even know where to look? Emerald didn't look up. Her head remained buried in the console while she fiddled with its wiring. Salem said Cinder. She choked up a little. That had happened in Mistral. A spark greeted her efforts. That's the last pace. She sensed the arm she made. Somehow, he doubted Salem would take kindly to this. Such disobedience would not be taken lightly. Or maybe it would. One could never tell with Salem. She was. I trust she knows what you're doing. She knows a woman attacked Cinder because she felt the power leave her. Emerald didn't answer beyond that. I'll find her. You'll see. She'll be avenged. Mistral's a big place to look. For Hazel, it was answer enough. And if they're not there, then I'll look elsewhere. It was fair, Hazel allowed. Perhaps the poor girl wasn't so crazed as he first believed. She clearly had a plan, even if it was the barest bones of one. Maybe she'd get through this now, she was muttering to herself again as she struggled to spur the cold craft to life. Definitely off her rocker. She must have sensed the weight of his regard, because she rounded on him. Don't try to stop me. He should. He really should. For all her ego, Cinder had been a skilled killer. Anyone strong enough to slay her in combat was not someone he wished to trifle with. Moreover, he had no desire for undue bloodshed. Cinder was not a kind woman. She craved power above all else, used children as pawns, only to cast them aside when she was done. No noble motives for her. She craved only power. The world was well rid of a wretch like her. Emerald was likely the only one who mourned her passing. Yet had he not been the same when he first lost Gretchen? Mad with grief, wild and lashing out at all those he thought responsible. No one had been there for him. Emerald was even younger than he'd been at the time. Lost, adrift, alone. The gentle giant sighed. Who said anything about stopping you? He climbed into the craft after her. I'm going with you. What his words seemed to take the thief aback. A flicker of sanity shone through the madness. You are. I am. He laid a heavy hand upon her shoulder and nudged her aside. I know what it is to lose someone you love. Emerald granted him an odd look. Cinder isn't dead. She's right here, can't you see? Hazel looked to where she had beckoned and saw only empty air. And yet Emerald nodded. Of course, ma'am. I'll punish them for you. Don't worry. Yes, another nod. Of course. I love you too. It was then that Hazel knew. Either Emerald was seeing things her, and more likely, she was using her semblance on herself. She didn't even seem to be aware of it. Neither boded well for her. Initially he had chosen to accompany her out of concern for her well-being, concern from one kindred soul to another. Now he knew he must, if only to ensure she lived to see another sunrise. Argus wasn't a terribly large place. Naruto wasn't quite sure why that relieved him, only that it did. A small place like this made it easy to ask around. While Neo and Adam drew some odd glances, none questioned them. By contrast, asking after a group of colorful girls and their entourage worked out rather nicely. It was easy enough to find them. They hit on a lead within the first 5 minutes of their arrival. Oh, you're after Saffron's place. An old man told them. It's the house on the left. Can't miss it. Thought it was strange that she had a bunch of friends over. Naruto took his directions with a smile. Things were looking up. Now if he could just figure out why Neo was limping along behind him. You okay? She nodded wordlessly. It's just you were walking funny. Nope. Her grin was telling. Just found a new kink. Use the cloak next time, will you? His face burned at that. Thankfully, they found the home in question. Neo all but trembled in anticipation, her smile fading into a thin line of stress. Naruto didn't blame her. They were staying here seemed a cozy little home for heroes to hide. Still there was light in the windows. Adam took one look at it and scoffed, but he looked anxious too. Naruto wasn't much sure why. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Striding up the steps, he gathered his resolve, reared back, and knocked once, twice, thrice. Now. Hello, is anyone home? I'm looking for. The door creaked pen, nearly bowling him over. Lilac eyes blinked back at him, set within a pale face framed by a stunning mane of blonde hair only slightly tousled by sleep. It hadn't even occurred to them that they might be asleep at this hour. She looked like she was torn between slugging him in the face or just kicking him in the groin for his troubles. Who are you? She growled. Do you have any idea how late it is? Hello, Blondie. Neo pushed in ahead of him, chirping with faux happiness before he cold answer. Can Little Red come out to play? She looked past them, saw Adam, Neo beside him. You. Adam saw her confusion and blinked. I'm sorry, have we met? Young's reaction was understandable, to say the least. Her face drained of all color and her bleary eyes slammed into faced with two of her greatest enemies. She reacted poorly. Amber Celica deployed with a harsh click and slammed down into Neo's face. It struck the glass of an illusion instead. The little minx reappeared on her left, grinning from ear to ear. Young ignored him and lunged at Adam instead. Naruto caught her by the scruff of the neck and launched her into a lamppost, denting it with an ominous crunch. It didn't even slow her. Rather than stay down like any sensible person, she sprang right back to her feet and lunged at Adam again, to the exclusion of all else. Noise came from Saffron's home behind her, a sure sign that the brawl hadn't gone unnoticed. Adam stepped back, warning Will before him in a defensive stance. What was that for? She only shrieked at him. I'll kill you, do you hear me? I quote, I'll kill you. Naruto slapped a palm to his head. So much for negotiations. Neo tore Hush free from its scabbard with a merry giggle. Hard way it is. Hard way it is. Everyone went mad. Should have seen this coming. Naruto watched it all with a certain air of detachment. Everything unfolded around him in slow motion, but he wasn't quite a part of it, like an outsider looking through a window. Young dove on Adam with a shriek, only for Neo to grab her by the hair and haul her backwards. Ire diverted, the raging blonde rounded on her with a hiss. She received a spinning kick to the face for her troubles and went sprawling to the tarmac. Neo crooked a finger at Young. Sloppy, sloppy. Lilac eyes blazed red as her hair ignited. Big talk from a dead girl, what? No Torquick to help you this time. You've got some nerve. Mismatching eyes burst into wild flame and narrowed upon her. He's gone, like you're about to be. Now that was going a little too far, wasn't it, Neo? We came here for answers, not murder. Her gaze flitted to his. She started it. Maybe, but that's no reason to. His words trailed off as the sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the air. Twin shadows fell over him and he reached back with both arms, catching his would-attackers by the throat. His lone eye flitted left, then right, taking in the now struggling teens in his grasp. A boy with knives and a girl with a hammer. A flick of his wrist slammed them down to the ground and knocked them out cold. Aura fizzled dully. Neither rose again. Pity. People were so flimsy in this world. Get excited. He straightened with a sigh as he dusted off his hands. Now let's talk this over like adults, shall we? He stole a glance over his shoulder and made a point of stepping away from Ren and Nora. Behind him, Weiss and John, only just emerging from the doorway, stilled at the sight. Behind them he glimpsed an older man alongside and a wiry crone of a woman, each looking rather nonplussed with his deeds. The former reached for his weapon and drew it with a flourish. Naruto pursed his lips. Please, don't. While Yang's ire was suitably diverted, Adam took full advantage to retreat, yet further proof of his amnesia, he had no interest in fighting. The dark shadow currently leaping from Saffron's broken window disagreed. Adam Blake slammed into him like a meteor, all but bearing him down to the ground. Why are you here? You stalked me halfway across the world. Stalked you? Adam blinked up at her with his good eye. I don't even know who you are. It sent Blake over the edge. She stabbed down. Adam retaliated with a snarl. His boot kicked up and caught her in the chest, hurling her back into, then through the house. A scarlet streak shot out the door after her in the same instant, arrowing for Yang. Faster than the mortal eye could possibly comprehend, it blurred forth. Naruto intercepted it with his arm. Now, he drawled. Let them work out their differences. He reached in and did the impossible, physically yanking Ruby Rose out of her semblance to haul her upright. At least he assumed this to be Ruby. Neo had been thorough in her description. Who else wore a getup like this? A burning golden eye met a pair of startled silver and narrowed. Her feet pinwheeled wildly in the air. You must be Ruby. His smile was all teeth. It's so nice to meet you face to face. Neo's told me all about you. The little Reaper took one look at him and squeaked. Leap. Look, we really don't want any trouble. Yang hurtled past and found herself embedded in a brick wall. Neo sauntered after her with a merry little spring in her step. Yeah, Naruto quirked a brow. Well, there's gonna be trouble if you don't answer her questions. Harbinger kissed his neck. Drop her. I will, he whispered. Just give me a minute. Hiro frowned. Aren't you gonna do something? Naruto shrugged. Why should I? My fight's not with them. Maria flung up a wizened arm. Finally someone who makes sense in this god's forsaken place. Naruto supposed that was his cue. He ought to step in before things truly raged out of control. Adam had Blake pinned, his scabbard taut on her throat for all her struggles. Yang didn't look to be getting up anytime soon, and with half of poor ORNJ trapped underfoot, the rest didn't seem keen to put up a fight. All that would change if someone lost their life. His shoulders slumped in a sigh. Neo, he called over to her, stop bullying Yang and let's have this done, yeah. Neo stomped Yang through the wall. A muffled groan answered her. Naruto felt his right eye twitch. Satisfied, she hummed in response. Very. Then her gaze found Ruby. Now, as for you, at long last, the Spring Maiden had fallen. Finding her tribe in the wilds had proven difficult. Fighting her remarkably less so. It was almost anticlimactic really. Raven Branwen barely put up a fight towards the end. How could Shiora, spent, mind flayed, body broken beneath Hazel's fists, already been a shell of her former self before they'd tracked her down? Gone was the arrogant woman who had brought Cinder fall low. In her place lay a miserable wretch, wasted and gasping for air, clutching at her ruined stomach, clinging on to some last sliver of life. One look from Emerald was all it took to seal her fate. A single glance to trap this once mighty maiden in a hell of her own making. From there it was simple, painfully so. Hazel may have beat Raven down, but it was Emerald who administered the coup de grace. 3 quick stabs to Raven's torso had out her out, not enough to kill her outright, but just enough to make her bleed, enough to let her linger. Even then she couldn't claim full credit for her victory. Something had weakened Spring first, if not physically then mentally. Raven fought like a wild animal, not the cold, calculating swordswoman they'd known before. How else could a half-mad girl and a regretful giant bring her low? Yet for all that, Raven sneered in her final moments. Do you think killing me will bring her back? Hazel muttered something behind her, but Emerald didn't hear him. No, she didn't want to hear him. She refused to. Her fault. All her fault. It was her. Had to be her. Salem had said so. A woman in Mistral killed Cinder. Who else could it be? She begged for this chance. Hadn't told Hazel her intentions when he first left with her, if only because she knew he would try to stop her. By the time he realized what she intended, it was too late. Now here at last the moment was before her and she couldn't do it. Weak. The broken Branwen scoffed. Even weaker than me. What's wrong? Can't avenge your master. Cinder wasn't dead. She was right here, whispering to her, guiding her hand. Yes, that's the way. Do it. Kill her. Avenge me. Shut up. She reached down and grabbed a fistful of her hair. Just shut up. I know it was you. A cruel leer twisted Raven's ruined face. She was frozen solid when I dropped her into that pit. Her head tilted just so, dark hair forming a bleak halo around her head. How do you think she died? I'd say she probably shattered like. It was too much for Emerald's fragile peace eye. Thief's respite slammed down into her chest and those words died with a rattle. Emerald took hold of her face, made absolutely certain she the last thing she saw. No one else would gain the powers of Spring. She'd make certain of that. Raven smiled and spat blood in her face. See you in hell, Brett. Then it was done. Power crashed into her, searing her soul. The power of one maiden, not two. It didn't make any sense. At last, Raven had told the truth as she knew it. But if she hadn't slain Cinder, no. But Cinder was dead who had killed her, then that meant her work wasn't yet done. Far from it. It meant she must continue, that the true culprit lay elsewhere. But where to go now? Tears sprang to Emerald's eyes. She would make Cinder proud. She would show them all. A small art of her knew she was being used, that Salem wanted this. This hate, this rage, this awful feeling of fury and spite. She didn't care. She would avenge Cinder. And if she died in the doing, what did it matter? She would see her again. One way or another, she'd get her way. Whether she lived or died was inconsequential. The world would burn for this.